Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are finally going to be doing some more sewing. It's been such a long time, but I am super excited to have another sewing video. I've actually just had time to work on sewing, finally. So we're going to be making a single-breasted waistcoat or vest that's going to go under a jacket that I'm currently making right now. It's currently basted together. It's made out of a yellow silk with blue flower pattern that I bought years ago. I believe I bought it in 2020. Yeah, I bought it with a gift card that was given to me when I graduated from college back in 2020. So it's been hanging around for a while. There's a hair in my mouth. So it's been hanging around for a while and I am super thrilled to finally be able to use it. Let's jump into it. So to begin with, I worked on getting the darts on the canvas interlining all stitched up, and with tailor's canvas you stitch them so that the darts butt up together. The edges of the darts butt up together. You don't pinch them together and sew them like you do normal darts. And you're supposed to do that with a cross stitch, I believe, or a herringbone stitch maybe. The stitch I did it turned into a ladder stitch, I think, kind of. But it wasn't like a real stitch with a name or anything. It was just kind of whatever I could get to work. But it did work, so no harm, no foul. And I feel like I should address this now. Eventually, I believe a piece of dried bird poop is going to appear from underneath this piece of fabric because, well, when you live with a parrot, you try your best to clean up after them, but sometimes you miss a spot and don't notice it, and you become kind of blind to it after a while, so then you don't notice it until you've recorded it and posted it on the internet. So yeah, don't judge my housekeeping skills, please. They're abysmal. The next step is to cover these seams with twill tape, and the twill tape is just whipped down on either side, and this is just done to strengthen the whole thing, because those stitches that you do to butt the dart pieces up against each other are not very strong. They are just there to kind of give it, they're basting, basically. They stay in, but they're basically basting. It's this piece of twill tape that's actually going to do the work of holding it all together. And I kind of went back and forth about whether or not I should put on twill tape on both sides of the seams or just on one. I eventually decided to just do it on one side because I was afraid if I put on too much twill tape, then it would create a lump which would kind of telegraph through to the surface silk of the waistcoat, and I really didn't want to have that be visible. So fingers crossed that this suffices and is strong enough. So far there have not been any issues, so I hope that it will work out. Oh. I think I just startled the bird. Oops. Kiss, kiss. Kiss, kiss. Kiss, kiss. Oh, good birdie. Kiss, kiss. Good bird. No.
To the sixth layer of hell, heresy.
Here I'm just trimming off the excess, and I was listening to a thing about Dante's Inferno, and I thought it picked up on a funny spot, so I left it in. Here I'm pinning the darts into the top layer silk, and these darts are done in just the normal way of doing darts, where you kind of, you fold it and then put it in the seam, and then there's this little pocket of space. You know how darts are done. They're not done in the tailor's canvas kind of way of doing darts. It's just the normal way of doing darts.
Their soul is sucked to hell, and their body is filled with a demon.
And we pick up on yet another funny out-of-context piece of Dante's Inferno. If you're interested, I'll link the video I was watching down below. It's very good. But On to what I'm doing. Right now in this clip, I'm working on back stitching the fold line on the lapel before I go into the pad stitching. I'm not going to go into detail about how this is done. If you want to see more about how it's done, then I'll link another one of my videos below, and I'll put it in the cards too, up above. And I go more into depth about how and why this is done. But just very basically, where the lapel is supposed to fold over, you back stitch along that line just to basically give yourself an indication of where you're supposed to put the fold into the pad stitching. So now I was on to working on the pad stitching, and this is done through the top layer fabric and through the horsehair interlining. And you do this by rolling the fabric over your finger along that line where you've previously back stitched, and by doing the pad stitching over that part with it rolled, that is what gives the lapel the ability to roll backwards, to turn backwards as lapels do. I can't really explain verbally how to do pad stitching, and there are a lot of tutorials. I'll link one down below if you want a tutorial for how to do pad stitching. And if you want to figure out why this works the way it does, basically it's because there is more fabric in the top part than there is in the bottom part, so it doesn't want to roll back flat, basically. And if that didn't make sense, well, I'll link a video down below to make it make sense. I'll also include a couple seconds of footage, not sped up, of my hands just doing the pad stitching so you can kind of see how it's done. This transition was instantaneous for you. It was about 3 days of continuous pad stitching for me. But I'm now working on pinning on the lapel facing. So this is part of the part of the lapel that is actually seen. The part that I had earlier that I cut out with the main body of the waistcoat that I was pad stitching over is the underside that gets folded over. So this is the part that's going to be on the front that you're actually going to see. There is no pad stitching on it. It's going to get stitched on around the edge of the canvas interlining. And the stitching is going to be right outside of the interlining because I don't want to actually catch any of that interlining in that seam, because that will make the seam very big and bulky and not very elegant. At this point, I've sewn the facing on and pressed it and trimmed back the seam allowance and all that good stuff. So now I am sewing a top stitch along the edge of that seam, about 1 millimeter or centimeter or a very small amount of space inwards. This will be visible. It's decorative, but it also helps to keep that seam very crisp and to keep anything from shifting around. Here I'm stitching the darts into the interior lining. I'm beginning with the horizontal bust dart. This just makes it fit more nicely and makes it easier for the lapel to roll backwards. Having tried this on, the front is a little bit wrinkled and puckered, and I think the problem is that I didn't get these darts quite right. I think they needed to be wider further in and narrower further towards the edge of the lapel, because it just doesn't sit quite correctly. But nope, I've learned for next time. And I didn't bother changing the thread on this because this is going to be on the inside. The horsehair canvas doesn't sit right next to my, well, I mean, none of my outer clothes sit right next to my body. There are many layers on underneath, but the horsehair canvas is not going to be visible even when the waistcoat is off. This covers that horsehair canvas. So the horsehair is entirely an interlining. You don't see it at all. And here you can see what I mean. I'm placing that lining fabric onto the inside of the waistcoat portion, and I'm going to be stitching it in and trimming it down so it fits nicely. And this brown color is very, very common for lining fabrics of the 19th century. You see it all over the place. It would usually actually be polished cotton. That's kind of difficult to come by these days, so this is a not polished cotton, but the color is on point, and I'm very, very thrilled by that. It's amazing how excited I am by an ugly brown color, just because I've seen it a lot on antique garments. Here I'm trimming back the canvas in the shoulder because I'm not going to want that to be in the shoulder seam because it will make it bulky. However, I later ended up having to fiddle with the shoulder seams, and there is in fact canvas in those seams because I got too lazy to... Not lazy, I wasn't being lazy. I was exhausted and frustrated, and I wanted to just get these seams sewn up. So I didn't bother to trim out the canvas the 6th time I redid these. So now it was time to add the front waistcoat portion to the back, and I don't know if I got this on camera. I don't think I did, but I trimmed away part of the canvas interlining so it doesn't reach all the way into that seam. It stops kind of at the side bust line, just past the second dart. So that makes the whole thing a little bit more slim fitting, as it were. I thought that I caught the back on camera. I had distinctly remember filming that process, but that was about 6 months ago at this point. I made this over the course of about 6 months because in law school, not a ton of time to work on sewing, so I started it at the beginning of Christmas break. That's when I did the back, and then I did the other side front over spring break, and I didn't film that part because I didn't really know what I was doing, so I wanted to get a slight idea of what I was doing before I recorded myself, and then I am finishing it over summer break, so sometime between Christmas break and summer break, the back footage has disappeared into thin air. But it is quite boring footage. It's just a back, nothing fancy about it. It's not going to be seen because I'm going to be wearing a jacket over it, so it's just made out of that brown cotton again. And then sometime around this point, I inserted boning into the front darts. And that was very simple. I just took the boning out of its pre-made casing, filed down the edges, and put it in the twill tape, because the twill tape it acts just like a boning casing. It's sewn down on the sides and on the top, so I just slipped it in the bottom and whip-stitched the bottom of it closed, and boom, pre-made boning casings. I felt like a genius. Alright, so I did the thing where I kind of worked on it a lot and didn't film. I tend to do that a lot towards the end of a project, but it was pretty boring. I was just working on getting the padding in here all figured out and making many, many minute changes to how this was sewn on. There was just a lot of looseness here, so I kept on ripping out this seam and sewing it on at more and more of an angle to get more of this lapel, to get it dragged higher up. So I finally got that, and I also finished off the bottom. So sorry for not filming that, but it's just a very simple thing. So now the time has come, oh, I burned myself on the iron. The time has come to do the last finishing touches, which will be just finishing off this bit here, putting in facing on the armholes and the buttons and buttonholes. So I'm gonna work on this now, the back part, and I've realized that I have no idea how to do this, how to make this work. So I think I'm just gonna pin or sew a facing onto here and just kind of have it end on top of this. Oh, you can't even see that. So I have no idea how I'm gonna do this. I think I'm just gonna sew a facing onto here and then fold it over and just kind of have it end on top of the lapel. I'm sure there are actual real tailors who are crying right now seeing this, because I'm sure this is not how you're actually supposed to do it, but I've kind of worked myself into a hole with this. I can't figure out how else to do it, so that's what we're gonna do. I'm sewing on the Armscye facings here, and this was quite a challenge. They should have been cut on the bias, but I didn't have enough of this silk fabric left to cut strips on the bias that were long enough for this, so I had to cut them on the straight grain. And yes, I could have used a different fabric for the facing since it's not going to be seen, but for some reason I just felt very strongly that I had to make these facings out of silk. Don't ask me why, I couldn't tell you why, but I had a great amount of difficulty easing and pushing and folding and just kind of squishing this fabric into place because it was cut on the straight grain, and straight grain things do not like to go around circular spaces. But I did it in the end. Super me.
The difficulties I had in attaching these facings had not yet even begun when I was working on the machine. The true challenge came when I was sewing on the inside by hand. I had such a hard time getting these facings to fit. It was a nightmare. It should have taken me maybe 10 minutes to whip stitch around that Armscye and get the facing on. It took me half an hour each. It took me an hour total to get these facings whip stitched on, when it should have taken me 20 minutes tops, because I had such a hard time easing this fabric into place. I had to pull it and stretch it and constrict it in weird ways and refold. Oh, it was an absolute nightmare. Remind me never to cut Armscye facings on the straight grain ever again. It was terrible. But as always, I did end up getting it done, like Superwoman. Go me. The buttonholes, on the other hand, were tedious but not difficult, and they gave me a chance to use my antique buttonhole cutter, which I got for Christmas. And I think it is absolutely wonderful, although I have yet to figure out how to use it efficiently because it was a little bit tricky to use, to say the least. But I'll learn in time. But it's a really, really cool gadget, and I will put pictures of it on my Instagram if you're interested. I sewed the buttonholes first by machine and then cut them out with the gadget and sewed them by hand. I did that on the machine first because this silk fabric frays like nobody's business, and I did not want to have it sliced with no kind of stitching to hold it in place while I was sewing the buttons, because I knew that if I did that, it would just fray all the way up and I would be left with nothing. And that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. So I did all of the buttonholes by machine and then went over them by hand. And I went over them with this buttonhole twist that is supposedly silk. I think it might not be silk, just between you, me, and the fence post, but beggars can't be choosers. And it also doesn't quite match. This is This is the waistcoat is a very yellow gold, and the buttonhole twist is more of an orange gold, but again, beggars can't be choosers, and it was all I had, and it was all I could get. So I just decided to go with it, and there we have it. So then all I needed to do was sew on these pretty antique buttons, and the camera does not do them justice, really. And sew on this single piece of boning at the front, and it was done. And now we're going to do just a little bit of vanity footage, not a whole lot. And I want to point out that this is not something I'm going to be wearing on its own. I'm also not going to be wearing it with this skirt or this shirt. The back is very plain, and it's something that I'm going to be wearing underneath a jacket that I'm currently making. So one of the next videos that I release will be of the process of making the jacket, which is going to go over this. So this is not going to be worn just showing off that plain back to the world.
A huge, huge thank you to Mary Royal, Kit Kat Stitch, River Shoal, V Birchwood, Emily Donnelly, and Sandra White for sponsoring this channel on Patreon. If you would also like to sponsor this channel on Patreon, there'll be a link down below. No hard feelings if you can't. I'm also going to link to my Instagram down below so you can follow me there, which you totally should, and I'm going to link to my email so you can get in touch with me. Please don't forget to like this video and to comment, I used to not be able to stand it when YouTubers did this, and now look at this. I've become what I couldn't stand. But I'm doing it. Only about 10% of the people who watch my channel regularly are subscribed, so please subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps. Oh my gosh, I'm really turning into one of them. You have no idea how much it helps. Not only does it help the channel, but it also gives me an eco boost, which is always nice. So yes, please subscribe, and I hope to see you around next time. Bye-bye.